Hello again and welcome to Queen's Brexit. I'm Thomas Darwood and I'm making this recording impromptu on the eve of Good Friday 2019. In this talk I want to try and convey to you the pragmatic and rational manner in which Almighty God created both Christendom and the secular tangent of Western civilization, that is the two dovetails. Now you may notice that in my website I gave the experience on the 1st of April, which alludes to 2 years before when I was in a Gloucestershire farmhouse when I experienced that unique visitation upon me, which conferred upon me later a Trinitarian identity. But I don't want to talk about that now. I'd rather talk about how and what I derive from that visitation. It's to understand firstly that God had created something and that creation era has finished. The second is how he created what it was that he created. I'm going to convey a tuition course of how he created it in 5 different stages in both the religious arena and the secular arena, to denote that it was the same author or creator in both the religious and secular tangent. And I found that the framework of the Collect prayer with 5 ordered and developing stages with a satisfying conclusion is the way in which we can understand the ordered way in which the Creator developed what his intent for humanity was. It is to show us how to become human beings. Now I've applied the 5 stages of the Collect, and there are 2 distinct tangents. The first 2 stages are always objective. They address and then they substantiate an idea or a constitution or whatever. The second, third and fourth stages are the subjective response against the 2 objective realities, so to speak. And that is a very important thing to convey, to understand what I'm trying to put across to you through art in particular, that is through painting and through literature. Now I want to begin with 2 particular figures which you all will recognize, which are so powerful that they come outside almost of my tuition course because they embrace everything about it, whereas all the other figures in art express a definitive stage 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, whereas these 2 great figures circumvent all these 5 stages, and they are Shakespeare and Rembrandt. What these 2 figures achieve is the astonishing understanding of our humanity, not in a fixed period of time as the other artists will do, as I show you, but across time. There is neither a beginning nor an end to what they project. Through painting, Rembrandt shows the intricacy of our humanity and all the different human emotions that are depicted in those fabulous paintings. Shakespeare does exactly the same. His genius resides in placing his stories in a particular period in human history, in particular through English kings and stories placed around Italy. But the truth he unveils is the truth, universal truth of our humanity, how we as human beings behave. He understands every particle, like the brushstrokes of Rembrandt's fabulous paintings. This was entirely what the Almighty wanted humanity to understand, and this was the gift of comprehension to service the call to duty. Without this understanding of who we are as a human species, we would never be able to implement our sense of duty towards ourselves and the community, society and the world around us. And the starting point, as you will know through history, are these two amazing figures. Now, I said these two figures transcend time, whereas these next 5 stages I will show you how the figures are fixed in a period of time to reflect certain aspects of our humanity, and how they go through the first 2 stages of displaying objective understanding of our humanity, moving toward the 3 stages which display what we do about our humanity once we have secured the integrity of who we are. Then we express that integrity in actions within ourselves, towards society and towards the wider world. Now, I believe we can trace these 5 stages to the 5 great painters, or an example of 5 great painters in a certain period of time. And I've used the French school of art to carry across these 5 different stages, flanked by different great art through music, through literature and the field of religion, especially of English religion. So the first is Nicolas Poussin. Now, he addresses our humanity through a philosophical point of view by using allegorical figures. Most of his paintings depict a grand scene of some kind in which he is trying to convey the overall perspective from a philosophical point and not an individual point, as the paintings of Rembrandt reflect. These are grand paintings with grand themes. They address our humanity in an overall circumventing arch which is very, very widespread. Although the paintings are depicting reality, the story is mostly allegorical. Now, in the field of music, Bach addresses our humanity through musical terms. He is undoubtedly the greatest composer in terms of articulating how music is structured. Milton does the same in terms of poetry. And George Herbert is the great metaphysical religious poet. These 3 figures address in relative terms what is going to develop later. They are objective in what they're trying to convey. And I've called this first movement How to Design a Car, because it is addressing the idea of something which is going to develop in the second stage. Now, the second stage in How to Develop a Car are the car components, the thousands and thousands of components which have to be manufactured as a consequence of the intent to create a car. Now, In paintings, the second great figure that I've chosen in the French School of Art is Antoine Watteau. Now, his pictures reflect meticulously a particular figure central to that picture, and that is conveying the extraordinary finesse of clothing upon women. The pictures and figures around him are painted with less exactness. What he's trying to do, he's trying to substantiate something about the central figure, and in this case it is to do with clothing. All the figures in art, they choose a particular figure and they make that figure central as the objective reality of the picture. In music, Mozart does this with absolute consummation of perfection. His music shows us what our humanity is reflected in music. His music is not allegorical, as is in Bach's or the paintings of I'll try to remember all these great figures of Poussin. Mozart's music is what musical people called pure music. It is unlike other music, great composers like Beethoven, which is going to come later. Mozart expresses the refinement of our humanity in the same way that Watteau expresses the refinement of part of the fabric of who we are. Pope does exactly the same in poetic terms. He reflects the refinement of our humanity. He is not allegorical. And Wesley's hymns does exactly the same. Wesley's hymns reflect theologically and doctrinally the exactness of biblical teaching. Now, the third period in the intent to create a car after the components have been created, manufactured, they then reach the third stage, which is the assembly line. Now, in musical terms, or rather, firstly, in painting terms, in the French School of Art, it is reflected in Delacroix. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Now, that picture exactly reflects what Beethoven is trying to do in his music. After Bach and Mozart has championed the cause of what it is our humanity is and what it is to address, Beethoven shows us the impassioned response, because we are now of the stature to express ourselves. After Bach and Mozart has infused into our humanity in musical terms, and the great painters has infused in their paintings the objective reality of who we are, we can now start to express with impassion. The passion that is in this picture reflects perfectly the passion of Beethoven's music. And the same is what is achieved in Wordsworth's poetry. The other figure, I believe, is James Hudson Taylor, the great missionary who went to China to create the China Inland Mission, and incidentally it was this missionary which converted my father to Christianity. That missionary society is the outward expression after Herbert's poetry to express the overall address of the Christian message, and the hymns of Wesley to outline the meticulous detail of Christian doctrine, which is reflected in music and in poetry and in art. The third stage is always the petition. Delacroix expresses it in painting, Beethoven in music, Wordsworth in poetry, and James Hudson Taylor in expressing the missionary society, which is going out to express what it is that Christianity wants to achieve after the message has been understood. Now, in the fourth stage, after the assembly line, we get a picture of a car. The car has come into being after the planning stage, the components have been manufactured, and the assembly lines has brought together. At the end, we call it a car. Now, it gets more difficult to explain why Van Gogh is the same expression as a car in painting terms. I can only say this, that the paintings are much more expressive of what our emotions are transfigured from philosophical ideas, from refinement of that idea, and from the explosion of emotion of those ideas. We now come to a more romantic expression of what it is that we're trying to outwardly express. It is the reasons for the petition. The petition is Beethoven. The reason is Van Gogh in art terms. And Verdi represents as one of the characters, in the same way that perhaps Tchaikovsky also does the same, in musical terms, Tennyson in poetic terms, and Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army, in religious terms. They are not all definitive, but I hope you can see what it is that I'm trying to convey, which depicts an ordered and developing unity, which Almighty God was behind this calibrated and this ordered way in which He placed His arms around a certain nation, a certain group of people across a certain period of human history. Now, the fifth stage is, what is a car? How do we express what a car is? The car is a piece of metal, it's a piece of engineering. It has not yet reached a stage where we can define what it actually does. We know that a car is a mode of transport. That is the fifth conclusion we come after the intent to create a car, the components, the assembly line. The car comes into transition as a complete entity, but it needs an idea to show us what it is for. Now, in the French School of Art, Monet expresses this from this point of view. Art is trying to express how we feel about the world around us. It is very romantic, and there are two words to express, to flank the idea of objective reality and of subjective reality. In musical terms, in classicism, there is classical music and there is romantic music. Bach and Mozart express classicism in music, the objective reality, as do the painters and the poets and the religious figures. In the last three stages, especially the last one, is express romanticism at its most individual. Rachmaninoff in music expresses romantic feelings at its most intricate and profound. Hardy does the same in poetic terms, and Eglantine Jebb is the founder of the Save the Children Society, a New Zealand lady, I believe. She expresses the front line of where Christianity wants to express itself, having spoken about its belief in the altar inside the church. And I want to go lastly to show you how the hymns develop in the same ordered 5 stages. The first set of hymns address who Almighty God is, emphasizing him as creator and as saviour. That is reflected in the altar. The second stage is also objective, reflected in the pulpit, and here are the great doctrinal hymns which Wesley was so great at expressing, and they centre on the figure of Christ and on Christian doctrine. The third stage is reflected in the pews. They reflect the passion after the Trinitarian God has been expressed and after the doctrinal stages has been expressed in terms of hymns. The fourth stage, like the car, it is come into a singularity. Here we have the great hymns of Christendom which reflect personal development of faith. They are extremely close. They are the expression of one single person, whereas other hymns express the corporate nature of what we as Christians believe. Now the last stage reflects praise and service in the environment, which is exactly what art does in terms of how society in its broadness expresses itself. So I hope you can see that the framework of the collect has the ability to place over a particular period in human history how Christendom and Western civilization came into being in an ordered and developing unity with a satisfying conclusion. In both the religious arena and the secular arena, to denote they are both the same idea, they come from the same intent, then they are meant to begin to reflect the same creator behind it. As a singularity, they are indeed the realization of the allegorical Eden of Genesis. Thank you.